King Aldrich Blackthorn stood at the tall window of his castle, watching the morning sun rise over the northern mountains. At 32 years old, he was the strongest Lycan king in centuries, but today he felt more tired than ever. The weight of leadership pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. "Your Majesty, the council is waiting," his advisor Thomas said from behind him. Aldrich sighed deeply. He knew what this meeting was about. For months, his council had been pushing him to marry and produce an heir. They worried about the future of their pack, about what would happen if something happened to him. But Aldrich had seen too many political marriages fail. He had watched his own parents live like strangers in the same castle. The council chamber was filled with the pack's most important members. Elder William, who had served Aldrich's father, sat at the head of the long wooden table. His weathered face showed years of wisdom and worry. "My king," Elder William began, "we must discuss the Eastern Pack's proposal again." Aldrich took his seat at the head of the table, his jaw tight with frustration. "I've already told you my thoughts on marriage, William." "But this isn't just about marriage anymore," Council Member Robert spoke up. "The vampire clans in the south are getting stronger. The rogue Lycans in the western lands are forming new alliances. We need the Eastern Pack as our allies now more than ever." Aldrich had heard these arguments before, but he couldn't deny their truth. The supernatural world was changing. Old enemies were becoming bolder. His pack needed strong alliances to survive what was coming. "Alpha Victor Greystone has a daughter," Elder William continued. "She's of age, and this marriage would unite our territories. It would double our strength." "What do you know about this girl?" Aldrich asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. The council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Robert cleared his throat. Alpha Victor was honest about his daughter's situation. "He says she bears the marks of an ancient curse. Her appearance is challenging." "Challenging how?" Aldrich pressed. "He wouldn't give details," William admitted, "but he made it clear that she's not what most would call beautiful. However, she's intelligent, well-educated, and comes from pure Lycan bloodline." Aldrich stood up and walked back to the window. In the distance, he could see his pack members training in the courtyard. Young Lycans learning to fight to protect their families. They trusted him to keep them safe. How could he put his personal desires above their safety? "The Eastern Pack controls the mountain passes," Robert added. "Without their support, we're vulnerable from 3 sides. Victor has promised full military support if you marry his daughter." "And what does the girl think about this arrangement?" Aldrich asked, still facing the window. "Alpha Victor says she understands her duty to her pack," William replied. Duty. That word had ruled Aldrich's entire life. Duty to become king when his father died too young. Duty to protect thousands of Lycans who looked to him for leadership. Duty to put the pack's needs before his own happiness. The room fell silent as Aldrich considered his options. He had always imagined that if he ever married, it would be for love. He had seen the spark between true mates, the connection that made 2 souls become one, but maybe that was a luxury he couldn't afford. "What are Victor's terms?" he finally asked. "Simple," Elder William said, relief evident in his voice. "A traditional Lycan wedding within 2 months. The ceremony will be held here in our territory. After that, full military and economic alliance between our packs." Aldrich closed his eyes and thought about his parents again. His father had married for political reasons too, and while their union had brought peace, it had never brought happiness. His mother had died young, some said from loneliness, but the alternative was war. If the vampire clans and rogue Lycans joined forces, his pack might not survive. How many of his people would die because he was too selfish to make this sacrifice? "There's something else," Robert said quietly. "Victor mentioned that his daughter has unique gifts. He wouldn't explain what kind, but he said they might be valuable to our pack's future." "Unique gifts?" Aldrich turned around. "What kind of gifts?" He was very secretive about it. "Only said that she's not like other Lycans." This was getting more mysterious by the minute. A cursed daughter with unique gifts. Aldrich wondered what kind of woman he was agreeing to marry. Meanwhile, 300 miles to the east, Elena Greystone sat in her private chambers, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her had long, flowing auburn hair that caught the light like fire. Her violet eyes seemed to glow with an inner light that she had learned to hide from others. Her skin was smooth and pale, without a single mark or blemish. She was everything her father had told the Northern King she was not. "Elena, may I come in?" Her father's voice came from outside her door. "Yes, Papa," she called, quickly covering the mirror with a cloth. Alpha Victor Greystone was a large man, even by Lycan standards. His graying hair and beard made him look older than his 50 years, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him a successful leader. "I've just received word from the Northern Territory," he said, sitting heavily in the chair across from her. "King Aldrich has agreed to the marriage." Elena felt her stomach drop. She had known this day would come, but she had hoped somehow it never would. "Papa, are you sure this is the right thing to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "Elena, you know why we have to do this. Your gifts, they make you too valuable, too dangerous to remain unmarried. There are those who would use you for evil purposes if they knew the truth." Elena nodded, though her heart ached. Since she was 16, strange things had happened around her. Plants grew faster in her garden. Injured animals healed when she touched them. Other Lycans seemed calmer, happier when she was near. Her father had consulted with the pack's oldest members, and they all agreed. She carried the bloodline of something ancient and powerful. "But I've lied to him," Victor continued, his voice heavy with guilt. "I told King Aldrich that you're cursed, that your appearance is difficult. I had to make sure he wouldn't marry you for your beauty, but for the alliance." "What if he's angry when he sees me?" Elena asked. "What if he feels deceived?" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Victor said firmly. "But Elena, I need you to understand something. Your safety depends on people not knowing your true nature. The Northern Pack is strong enough to protect you, and King Aldrich is honorable. He won't mistreat you." Elena stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the eastern mountains that had been her home all her life. Soon she would leave everything familiar behind to marry a man who expected to find a monster. "What if I can't control my gifts around him?" she asked. "You've been controlling them for years," Victor reminded her. "Just be careful. Don't let anyone see the full extent of what you can do." That night, Elena lay in bed thinking about her future. She had heard stories about King Aldrich Blackthorn. They said he was brave in battle, fair to his people, but cold and distant. They said he had never shown interest in any woman, that his heart was made of ice. What would happen when this ice-hearted king met his supposedly cursed bride? Would he be relieved to discover her true appearance? Or would he be angry about the deception? And more importantly, would he be able to protect her from the dark forces that her father insisted were hunting her? As the moon rose high in the sky, Elena felt the familiar tingle of power in her veins. Her gifts always grew stronger during the full moon. She closed her eyes and tried to push the energy down, to keep it hidden as she had learned to do. But deep in her heart, she wondered if she would ever be able to live a normal life, or if her divine heritage would always keep her trapped between truth and lies. 2 months later, both Elena and Aldrich would discover that some marriages are arranged not by politics but by destiny itself. The morning of the wedding arrived with gray clouds covering the Northern Territory. King Aldrich stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his formal ceremonial robes. The deep blue fabric was embroidered with silver wolves, representing his royal bloodline. Despite his impressive appearance, his reflection showed a man preparing for duty, not celebration. "Are you ready for this, my friend?" asked his closest advisor and childhood companion Thomas. "As ready as one can be for a marriage built on politics rather than love," Aldrich replied, his voice flat. Thomas had known Aldrich since they were children. He could see the resignation in his king's eyes. "You know, sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them." Aldrich gave him a skeptical look. "Thomas, I'm about to marry a woman whose own father warned me about her cursed appearance. I'm trying to prepare myself for a lifetime of accommodation." "Maybe her father was just being protective," Thomas suggested hopefully. "Or maybe he was being honest about what I'm getting into," Aldrich countered. "Either way, it's too late to change anything now." The great hall of the Northern Castle had been decorated for the occasion. White roses and silver ribbons adorned every surface, but even the beautiful decorations couldn't hide the tension in the air. Pack members from both territories filled the massive room, all curious to see their king's mysterious bride. Aldrich took his position at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back in a military stance. Elder William stood beside him, ready to perform the ceremony. The whispers from the crowd were impossible to ignore. "I heard she's terribly scarred," one pack member whispered. My cousin from the Eastern Territory says she never shows her face in public, another added. Poor King Aldrich, someone else murmured, making such a sacrifice for the pack. Aldrich's jaw tightened with each whispered comment. He reminded himself that this marriage was about more than personal happiness. It was about protecting his people, securing their future. He could endure anything for that. The great doors at the end of the hall opened with a loud creak. The crowd fell silent as Alpha Victor Greystone entered, his face serious and formal. Behind him walked his daughter, completely covered by a traditional wedding veil that hid her from head to toe. Aldrich watched as his bride approached. Her movements were graceful, almost ethereal, but the heavy veil made it impossible to see anything about her appearance. With each step she took, his stomach tightened with nervous anticipation. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the hall could hear it. Through the veil, she could see the massive crowd staring at her, could feel their curiosity and pity. But more than anything, she could feel the intense gaze of the man waiting for her at the altar. King Aldrich was even more impressive than she had imagined. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with the confidence of a true leader. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and even from a distance she could see the intelligence in his storm-gray eyes. He was handsome in a way that made her breath catch, but his expression was cold and distant. As she reached the altar, Elena's father placed her hand in Aldrich's. Even through her gloves she could feel the strength and warmth of his touch. For a moment she wondered what it would be like if this marriage was real, if this powerful man could ever care for her as more than just a political necessity. Elder William began the ceremony with the traditional Lycan wedding words. We gather today to unite two souls, two packs, two futures. This union will strengthen us all and create bonds that cannot be broken. Aldrich barely heard the words. His attention was focused on the woman beside him. Despite the veil, he could sense something unusual about her. Her presence seemed to calm his usually restless wolf spirit. There was something almost magical in the air around her. The ceremony continued with the exchange of vows. Aldrich spoke his promises in a clear, strong voice, committing to protect and honor his bride. Elena's voice was softer but equally sincere as she pledged her loyalty and dedication to him and his pack. Now, Elder William announced, the groom may lift the veil and see his bride. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The hall fell completely silent. Even the servants stopped their work to watch. Aldrich reached for the edge of the veil with hands that he was surprised to find were slightly trembling. He had prepared himself for the worst, had steeled his heart against disappointment. Nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to see. As the veil lifted away, Aldrich's world stopped. Before him stood the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, catching the light from the candles like liquid fire. Her skin was perfect, smooth and pale like porcelain, but it was her eyes that truly took his breath away, violet eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom and kindness that he had never encountered before. For several long moments, Aldrich could only stare. His mouth fell slightly open in shock. The woman in front of him was not cursed or disfigured. She was absolutely stunning, like something out of a fairy tale. The crowd's reaction was immediate and intense. Gasps echoed throughout the hall as pack members realized they had been completely wrong about their king's bride. Instead of pity, their expressions changed to awe and admiration. By the moon goddess, someone whispered loudly enough for others to hear. She's beautiful. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks as she watched Aldrich's reaction. His shock was obvious, and she couldn't tell if it was good or bad. Would he be angry that her father had lied? Would he suspect there was more to the story? Aldrich struggled to find words, something that never happened to him. He was known for his eloquence, his ability to speak confidently in any situation. But this woman had rendered him speechless. Elder William, sensing the need to move the ceremony along, cleared his throat. By the ancient laws of our people, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, your majesty. The kiss was supposed to be ceremonial, just a formal sealing of their vows. But when Aldrich's lips met Elena's, something unexpected happened. A spark of connection passed between them, something that had nothing to do with politics or alliances. For just a moment, both of them forgot about the crowd, forgot about the circumstances that had brought them together. Elena had never been kissed before, and the gentleness of Aldrich's touch surprised her. She had expected coldness from the man everyone called the Ice King, but his lips were warm and soft. When they separated, both were slightly breathless. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Aldrich and Elena only had eyes for each other. "Your father told me you were cursed," Aldrich said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. Elena's heart skipped. "In a way I am," she replied honestly, "just not in the way you expected." Before Aldrich could ask what she meant, they were swept into the celebration. Pack members approached to offer congratulations, musicians began playing, and servants appeared with food and drink. But throughout the entire reception, Aldrich couldn't take his eyes off his new wife. He watched as she gracefully spoke with guests, noticed how other Lycans seemed drawn to her presence. There was something almost hypnotic about her, something that made everyone around her seem calmer and happier. Elena, meanwhile, was trying to process her own surprise. She had expected a cold, distant husband who would barely tolerate her presence. Instead, she found herself married to a man whose attention made her pulse race, and whose smile, when he finally relaxed enough to show it, made her feel warm all over. As the evening wore on, Aldrich pulled Thomas aside. "Her father lied," he said simply. "About what?" Thomas asked, though he had eyes and could see perfectly well what Victor had lied about. "About everything. She's not cursed, at least not in any way that affects her appearance. She's—" Aldrich struggled to find the right word. "She's extraordinary." "Maybe that's why her father lied," Thomas suggested. "Maybe her beauty is exactly what he was trying to protect her from." Aldrich considered this. In their world, an unmarried woman of extraordinary beauty would attract dangerous attention. Perhaps Victor had been protecting his daughter by making potential suitors expect the worst. But if that was true, what other secrets was his new wife hiding? As the celebration continued into the night, neither Aldrich nor Elena knew that their marriage would prove to be far more than either of them had bargained for. The lies that had brought them together were nothing compared to the truths they had yet to discover about each other, and about the ancient forces that had been guiding their destinies long before they ever met. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and King Aldrich found himself more confused than ever. His new wife, Elena, was nothing like what he had expected, and not just because of her stunning beauty. There was something mysterious about her that he couldn't quite understand. Every morning, Aldrich would wake to find Elena already up, sitting by the window of their shared chambers, staring out at the sunrise. She seemed lost in thought, almost as if she was listening to something only she could hear. "Good morning," he would say, and she would turn to him with a smile that could light up the darkest room. "Good morning, husband," she would reply. But there was always something held back in her voice, some secret she wasn't sharing. Aldrich had tried to be patient. He understood that arranged marriages took time to develop into real relationships. But Elena's behavior was puzzling in ways that had nothing to do with their awkward beginning. For instance, there were no mirrors in her personal chambers. When he asked about it, she simply said she preferred natural light. But he had noticed that she avoided her reflection everywhere, turning away whenever they passed the large mirrors in the castle hallways. Then there was the way the castle staff reacted to her. Within days of her arrival, the atmosphere in the entire castle had changed. Servants who had been grumpy and tired seemed happier and more energetic. Even the castle guards, known for their serious demeanor, would smile when Elena passed by. But perhaps most puzzling of all was the way Elena interacted with the pack's more difficult members. There was Gregory, an older Lycan who had always been aggressive and short-tempered. He had caused problems for years, getting into fights and challenging Aldrich's authority. But after spending just a few minutes talking with Elena in the castle garden, Gregory had become completely calm and respectful. "She has a gift with people," Thomas observed one afternoon as they watched Elena helping to mediate a dispute between two pack families. "It's more than that," Aldrich replied, his eyes never leaving his wife. "Watch how they react to her." It's like she has some kind of natural authority, something that makes others want to please her. Thomas nodded. Have you asked her about it? I've tried, Aldrich said with frustration. But every time I bring up anything unusual, she changes the subject. She's hiding something, Thomas, and I need to know what it is. That evening, Aldrich decided to try a more direct approach. He found Elena in the castle library, reading an old book about Lycan history. She looked up as he entered, and again he was struck by how beautiful she was in the candlelight. Elena, we need to talk, he said, taking a seat across from her. She closed the book carefully, but not before he noticed it was about ancient bloodlines and supernatural gifts. What about Aldrich? About you, about us. About the fact that your father told me you were cursed when clearly you're anything but. Elena's hands tightened in her lap. My father was trying to protect me. From what? Aldrich leaned forward. Elena, I'm your husband now. I have a right to know what I'm protecting you from. For a moment, she looked like she might tell him everything, but then she stood up abruptly, the book falling to the floor. I should check on the evening meal preparations, she said, moving toward the door. But as she bent to pick up the fallen book, something extraordinary happened. The pages fluttered open by themselves, stopping at a section about moon goddesses and divine bloodlines. The candlelight in the room seemed to grow brighter, and for just a second, Elena's violet eyes appeared to glow with an inner light. Aldrich saw it all. Elena, stop. She froze, still bent over the book, her hand hovering above the pages. Your eyes, he said quietly. They were glowing. Elena straightened slowly, her face pale. You're imagining things. No, I'm not. Aldrich stood up and walked over to her. Elena, what are you? Before she could answer, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts and growls filled the air, followed by the sound of fighting. Aldrich ran to the window and saw several pack members in their wolf forms, circling around something in the courtyard. Stay here, he commanded Elena, already heading for the door, but she followed him anyway. They ran through the castle corridors and out into the courtyard, where they found a scene of chaos. A young pack member named David lay on the ground, bleeding from deep claw marks across his chest. The other Lycans were surrounding him protectively, all in defensive positions. What happened? Aldrich demanded. Rogue attack, one of the guards reported. 3 of them. They were trying to get into the castle. David fought them off, but he's badly hurt. Aldrich knelt beside David, assessing his injuries. The wounds were deep and bleeding heavily. Even with Lycan healing abilities, injuries this severe could be fatal. Get the pack healer, he ordered. I'm here, Your Majesty, called Oliver, the elderly Lycan who served as their medical expert. He examined David quickly and shook his head gravely. The wounds are too deep. I'm not sure there's anything I can do. Elena, who had been standing quietly beside Aldrich, suddenly stepped forward. Let me try. Elena, no, Aldrich said, grabbing her arm. It's too dangerous. If there are still rogues around, please, she said, her violet eyes meeting his with desperate intensity. Trust me. Something in her voice made him release her arm. Elena knelt beside David and gently placed her hands over his wounds. At first, nothing happened, but then a soft golden light began to emanate from her palms. The pack members gasped in amazement as they watched David's wounds begin to close. The bleeding stopped, the torn flesh knitted itself back together, and within minutes he was sitting up, completely healed. By the moon goddess, Oliver whispered, I've never seen anything like it. Elena swayed on her feet, clearly exhausted by whatever she had just done. Aldrich caught her before she could fall, supporting her weight against his chest. Everyone go back to your duties, he commanded the gathered crowd. Increase the perimeter guards. I want to know if any more rogues are in the area. As the pack members dispersed, all stealing glances at Elena as they went, Aldrich helped his wife back into the castle. Now will you tell me the truth? He asked once they were alone in their chambers. Elena sat heavily in a chair, her face still pale from exhaustion. My father wasn't lying when he said I was cursed, but it's not the kind of curse you expected. What kind is it then? The kind that comes from having divine blood, she said quietly. My grandmother wasn't fully Lycan. She was descended from the moon goddess herself. That blood has been passed down through our family, but it skipped my father's generation. It showed up in me. Aldrich stared at her, trying to process what she was telling him. Divine blood. You're part goddess. A very small part, Elena said quickly, but enough to give me certain abilities. I can heal others, but it drains my own energy. I have a calming effect on other Lycans, and during the full moon my powers are much stronger. That's why your father called you cursed, Aldrich realized. Because having those powers makes you a target. Elena nodded. There are those who would use me for evil purposes. Dark creatures who would drain my power for themselves or use me to control other supernatural beings. My father kept me hidden my whole life to protect me from them. Aldrich sat down across from her, his mind racing. And now they know where you are. The rogue attack tonight, that wasn't random, was it? I don't think so, Elena admitted. Word has probably spread about our marriage. They may have come to investigate. How many people know about your heritage? Very few. My father, the pack elders, and now you. She looked at him with worried eyes. Are you angry that I didn't tell you sooner? Aldrich was quiet for a long moment, considering everything she had told him. Finally, he stood up and walked over to her chair, kneeling down so they were at eye level. Elena, I'm your husband. It's my job to protect you, whatever that means. But I can't do that if you don't trust me with the truth. Tears gathered in her violet eyes. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid you would see me as more of a burden than a blessing. I was afraid you would regret our marriage. Aldrich reached out and gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The only thing I regret is that you felt you had to face this alone. We're partners now, Elena. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. For the first time since their wedding, Elena felt truly hopeful about their future. But neither of them knew that their enemies were already making plans, and that the rogue attack had been just the beginning. The next morning, Aldrich sent messages to his most trusted allies calling for a private meeting. If his wife's divine heritage made her a target, then he needed to prepare for war. Because one thing was certain, he would protect Elena with his life, and anyone who tried to harm her would have to go through him first. 2 months after Elena revealed her true nature to Aldrich, their world began to change in ways neither of them had anticipated. Word of the moon goddess's descendant had spread throughout the supernatural community, and with it came both allies and enemies. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Thomas burst into the royal chambers without knocking. Your Majesty, we have a problem, he announced, slightly out of breath. Aldrich was already dressed for the day, but Elena was still in her nightgown, brushing her long hair by the window. The morning sunlight made her look even more ethereal than usual, and Thomas had to force himself to look away out of respect. What is it? Aldrich asked, immediately alert. 3 different vampire clans have requested meetings with you, all in the past week. And yesterday we received a message from the Western Rogue Pack. They want to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. Elena's brush stopped moving through her hair. She had been dreading this moment when the outside supernatural world would start taking notice of her presence. They want her, Aldrich said grimly. It wasn't a question. It appears so, Thomas confirmed. But there's more. Our scouts report unusual activity at the borders. Small groups of various supernatural creatures have been seen watching our territory. Nothing threatening yet, but definitely not normal. Elena stood up and wrapped a robe around herself. This is what my father was afraid of. Once word spread about what I am, everyone would want to either use me or control me. Well, they can't have you, Aldrich said firmly. Send replies to all of them, Thomas. Tell them that Queen Elena is not available for meetings, arrangements, or any other business. She is under the protection of the Northern Pack, and that protection is absolute. Already done, Your Majesty, Thomas replied with a slight smile. I took the liberty of making your position clear, but Elena was looking troubled. Aldrich, what if refusing to meet with them makes things worse? What if they decide to take me by force? Let them try, Aldrich growled, his protective instincts flaring. This pack has never been defeated in battle. But they've never fought enemies like these, Elena pointed out. Vampires, rogue packs, and who knows what else. How many of our people will die protecting me? It was a question that kept Aldrich awake at night. His first duty was to his pack, but Elena was part of that pack now. She was his wife, his queen, and his responsibility. Over the next few weeks, the situation continued to escalate. More supernatural groups requested meetings or sent diplomatic envoys to the Northern Territory. Aldrich turned them all away, but the pressure was building. Elena, meanwhile, was struggling with her own challenges. Her powers seemed to be growing stronger, especially as the full moon approached. She could heal more serious injuries now, but each use of her abilities left her more drained than before. It's like there's more power trying to get out, she explained to Aldrich one evening as they walked through the castle gardens. "Sometimes I feel like I'm holding back a flood. Is that dangerous?" he asked, taking her hand in his. "I don't know," she admitted. "My father never explained everything about my heritage. I think there were things even he didn't understand." That night, Elena's nightmares returned. She dreamed of dark figures surrounding her, reaching out with grasping hands. She dreamed of being torn away from Aldrich, of being used as a weapon against innocent people. She woke up screaming. "Elena, you're safe," Aldrich said, holding her close as she trembled. It was just a dream, but Elena wasn't so sure. Lately, her dreams had felt more like visions, glimpses of possible futures that made her blood run cold. The breaking point came during the next full moon. Elena had warned Aldrich that her powers would be at their strongest, but neither of them was prepared for what actually happened. It started during the evening meal in the Great Hall. Elena was sitting beside Aldrich at the high table when she suddenly gasped and gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "Elena?" "What's wrong?" Aldrich asked, immediately concerned. "Something's coming," she whispered, her violet eyes wide with fear. "Something dark. I can feel it." Before Aldrich could respond, the castle's alarm bells began ringing. Guards came running into the hall shouting reports of attacks on 3 different sides of the territory. "Vampires from the south," one guard reported. "Rogue Lycans from the west," called another. "And something from the north that we can't identify," added a third. Aldrich stood up, his mind immediately switching to battle mode. "This is coordinated. They're trying to divide our forces." But Elena was still gripping the table, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "Aldrich, I can't control it." "The moon. My power. It's too much." As if responding to her distress, every candle in the Great Hall suddenly flared brighter. The pack members looked around nervously as an energy they had never felt before filled the air. "Everyone out," Aldrich commanded. "All non-fighters to the inner chambers. Warriors, prepare for battle." But Elena grabbed his arm before he could leave. "Don't go," she pleaded. "This is a trap. They want to separate us. I have to protect the pack," he said, though it broke his heart to see her so frightened. "The pack won't matter if they capture me," Elena said urgently. "Everything they're doing is designed to get me alone and vulnerable." Aldrich realized she was right. The simultaneous attacks were meant to draw him and his strongest fighters away from the castle, leaving Elena with minimal protection. "Thomas," he called. "Change of plans. Half our forces stay here to protect the castle, send messages to the border posts. They are to hold their positions but not pursue attackers. This is a defensive operation only." As the battle preparations continued around them, Elena's condition was getting worse. Her skin was actually glowing now, a soft golden light that pulsed with her heartbeat. "I need to get outside," she said desperately. "I need to release some of this energy before I hurt someone." Aldrich helped her to her feet, and they made their way to the castle's highest tower. The full moon hung directly overhead, huge and bright. As soon as Elena stepped onto the tower balcony, her power exploded outward. Golden light erupted from her body, so bright that it lit up the entire castle grounds like daylight. Every Lycan in the territory felt it, a wave of strength and calm that filled them with confidence and determination. But the energy blast had an even more dramatic effect on their enemies. The attacking vampires, caught in the open when the divine light hit them, screamed and fled back into the darkness. The rogue Lycans, overwhelmed by the pure spiritual power, abandoned their assault and retreated to the forests. For several minutes, Elena stood bathed in golden light while waves of power rolled off her like heat from a fire. Aldrich stayed close, ready to catch her if she fell, but not daring to touch her, while so much energy was flowing through her. Finally, the light began to fade. Elena swayed on her feet, and Aldrich immediately swept her into his arms. "I'm okay," she whispered, though she was clearly exhausted. "But now they know for certain what I am. There won't be any more subtle approaches." She was right. The display of divine power had been seen for miles around. By morning, reports came in from scouts that large groups of supernatural creatures were gathering at the borders of their territory. "How many?" Aldrich asked Thomas grimly. "At least 3 vampire clans, 2 rogue Lycan packs, and something our scouts describe as shadow creatures. We have no idea what those are." Elena, who was still recovering from the previous night, looked pale but determined. "They're not going to give up. My power called to every dark creature within 100 miles. They know exactly what I'm capable of now." Then we need allies of our own, Aldrich decided. Send messages to every friendly pack in the region. Tell them what we're facing and ask for their help. Will they come? Elena asked. They'll come, Aldrich said with certainty. Because if these dark forces succeed in capturing you, they won't stop with just our territory. They'll use your power to dominate every supernatural community in the region. Over the next few days, allies began arriving at the northern castle. Alpha leaders from 6 different packs answered Aldrich's call for help. Even some vampire clans who opposed the darker members of their species offered support. But Elena knew that numbers alone wouldn't be enough. Her divine heritage made her incredibly powerful, but it also made her the ultimate prize for their enemies. The coming battle would determine not just their survival, but the future balance of power in the supernatural world. As she stood on the castle walls, watching their enemies gather in the distance, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She would not hide behind others while people died protecting her. When the final battle came, she would use every bit of her divine power to defend those she had come to love, even if it destroyed her in the process. The final battle began at dawn on the darkest day of the winter season. Elena stood on the highest tower of the northern castle, watching as hundreds of dark creatures surrounded their territory. The enemy forces were unlike anything she had ever imagined. Vampire clans with glowing red eyes, rogue Lycan packs twisted by dark magic, and shadow creatures that seemed to move like living smoke. They're waiting for something, Aldrich observed, standing beside her with his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Elena nodded, her violet eyes scanning the assembled forces below. They're waiting for the celestial alignment. It happens in 3 hours when the moon and sun will be perfectly positioned. During that time, my powers will be at their absolute peak, but also at their most vulnerable. Vulnerable how? Aldrich asked, though he suspected he didn't want to hear the answer. If they can capture me during the alignment, they can drain my divine essence completely. It would kill me, but it would also transfer all of my power to whoever performs the ritual. Aldrich's jaw tightened with anger and fear. Then we make sure they never get that chance. Down in the courtyard, their allied forces were making final preparations. 6 allied Lycan packs had answered Aldrich's call for help, bringing their numbers to nearly 800 warriors. 3 vampire clans who opposed the dark faction had also arrived, adding another 200 fighters to their cause. But Elena knew it wouldn't be enough. Their enemies outnumbered them 3 to 1, and many of the dark creatures possessed powers that normal Lycans couldn't match. There's something else, Elena said quietly. Something I haven't told you about the alignment. Aldrich turned to face her fully. After months of marriage, he had learned to read the subtle signs of her distress. Tell me, if I channel my full power during the alignment, every bit of divine energy I possess, I could create a barrier around our entire territory that would protect everyone inside. But using that much power would kill you, Aldrich finished, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I've been having dreams about it for weeks. Dreams that feel more like visions. I think this might be why I was born with these powers. To protect people when they needed it most. No, Aldrich said firmly, grabbing her shoulders. Elena will find another way. There has to be another way. What if there isn't? She asked, her voice breaking. What if this is the choice I have to make? My life for the lives of everyone in our territory. Before Aldrich could respond, Thomas appeared at the top of the tower stairs, breathing heavily from his rapid climb. Your Majesty, they're moving. The main force is advancing from the south. Estimated time until they reach our outer defenses. 1 hour. Aldrich looked one more time at his wife, memorizing every detail of her beautiful face. Then he kissed her with all the love and desperation in his heart. Promise me something, he said against her lips. Promise me you won't make any decisions about sacrificing yourself without talking to me first. Elena wanted to promise, but she couldn't lie to him. Instead, she kissed him back and whispered, I love you, Aldrich. More than I ever thought possible. The first wave of attacks came from 3 directions simultaneously. Vampire forces struck the eastern wall while rogue Lycans assaulted the western defenses. Meanwhile, the mysterious shadow creatures seemed to simply appear inside the castle grounds, bypassing the walls entirely. Aldrich led the main defense force, his sword flashing in the morning light as he fought with the skill and fury of a true Lycan king. Around him, his warriors battled with desperate courage, knowing they were fighting for more than just their lives. They were fighting for the future of their entire world. Elena remained in the castle's central tower, using her powers to heal wounded fighters who were brought to her. Each healing drained more of her strength, but she couldn't bear to let anyone suffer when she had the power to help them. As the battle raged on, it became clear that their enemies had been planning this assault for months. The dark forces fought with coordinated precision, always seeming to know exactly where the defenders were weakest. "They have inside information," Thomas reported during a brief lull in the fighting. "Someone told them our defensive strategies, but there was no time to worry about traitors." The second wave of attacks was already beginning, and this time the enemy forces included creatures that none of them had ever seen before, beings of pure darkness that seemed immune to normal weapons. It was then that Elena felt the celestial alignment beginning. The moon, though not visible in the daylight sky, was moving into perfect position with the sun. She could feel her power starting to surge, growing stronger by the minute. From her tower window, she could see Aldrich fighting in the courtyard below, surrounded by enemies but still standing strong. She could see Thomas defending the main gate with a group of loyal guards. She could see wounded fighters crawling toward the castle, hoping for her healing touch. And she could feel something else, a dark presence approaching the castle, something far more powerful than the creatures they had been fighting. The shadow at the edge of her perception took shape as the most terrifying being she had ever encountered. It was Lord Malachar, an ancient vampire who had been seeking divine power for centuries. He moved through the battle like it was nothing, his mere presence causing both allied and enemy fighters to flee in terror. He was coming for her, and Elena knew that no amount of courage or loyalty from her defenders would be enough to stop him. As Lord Malachar entered the castle, Elena made her choice. She couldn't let everyone she loved die protecting her. The celestial alignment was nearly perfect, and her power was reaching its peak. She walked to the center of the tower and closed her eyes, reaching deep into the divine heritage that had shaped her entire life. The golden light began to flow from her body, but this time she didn't try to control it. Down in the courtyard, Aldrich felt the change immediately. Every Lycan in the territory felt it, a surge of strength and courage that filled them with new determination. But Aldrich also felt something else, something that filled him with terror. He could sense Elena's life force beginning to fade. "No," he roared, abandoning his fight and racing toward the castle tower. But Lord Malachar was already there, climbing the stairs with inhuman speed. Aldrich reached the tower room just as the ancient vampire was approaching Elena, who was now surrounded by a pillar of golden light that stretched from floor to ceiling. "Stop!" Aldrich shouted, throwing himself between Elena and the vampire lord. Malachar backhanded him casually, sending him crashing into the stone wall. "You cannot stop what must happen, young king. Her power belongs to those strong enough to take it." Elena's eyes snapped open, and for the first time Aldrich saw her truly angry. "My power belongs to no one but me," she said, her voice echoing with divine authority. The golden light around her suddenly expanded, washing over both Aldrich and Lord Malachar. The vampire screamed as the pure spiritual energy burned him, but instead of fleeing he lunged forward, trying to grab Elena while she was channeling her power. But he had made a critical mistake. Elena wasn't just channeling her power. She was transforming it, creating something new. As Malachar's hands closed around her arms, the golden light changed, becoming something that was both healing and destructive, both divine and earthly. Aldrich, despite his injuries, struggled to his feet and reached for Elena's hand. The moment their fingers touched, something extraordinary happened. Elena's power didn't drain from her into the vampire. Instead, it flowed between her and Aldrich, creating a circuit of energy that neither of them could have achieved alone. Together, they unleashed a wave of power that was unlike anything the supernatural world had ever seen. It was divine authority combined with earthly wisdom, spiritual strength merged with physical courage. The energy swept out from the castle in all directions, not just protecting their territory but transforming it. Every dark creature caught in the wave was either destroyed or forced to flee. Lord Malachar himself was reduced to ash in seconds, but the allied forces, the loyal Lycans, the friendly vampires, even the castle servants, were strengthened and protected. When the light finally faded, Elena was still standing, still alive. The celestial alignment had passed, but instead of draining her power, it had transformed it into something she could share with her husband and her people. "How?" she whispered, looking at their joined hands in amazement. Aldrich smiled, though he was still shaking from the intensity of what they had experienced. "Love," he said simply. "Your power wasn't meant to be used alone. It was meant to be shared." In the days that followed, the supernatural world learned of the new type of leadership that had emerged from the Northern Territory. Elena and Aldrich ruled together, her divine wisdom balancing his earthly strength, creating a kingdom where all supernatural beings could live in peace. Elena never again had to hide her true nature. Her powers, instead of making her a target, made her a beacon of hope for creatures who had lived in darkness for too long, and Aldrich, who had once been called the Ice King, became known for his warmth and compassion, qualities that had been awakened by his love for his extraordinary wife. Their first child was born a year later, a daughter who inherited both her mother's divine heritage and her father's Lycan strength.